Money doesn't care about you. It doesn't know your story. It doesn't track effort or reward good intentions. It doesn't punish neglect in any emotional sense. It simply responds. And yet for something so indifferent, it produces incredibly consistent outcomes. Look at people who feel in control of their finances and those who don't. The difference is rarely intelligence. It's rarely even income. It's whether they understand that money follows principles. Not tips, not hacks, principles. Once you learn these principles, a lot of what used to feel random starts to make sense. The first one is simple, but easy to underestimate. Money makes babies, and what I mean by that is that money makes more money. Not metaphorically, mechanically. Given the right conditions, money reproduces. You place it somewhere it can earn, through investments, through ownership, through structures that generate returns, and over time, it grows. Then that growth generates even more growth, and the process repeats. It's very tempting to think that this is only available to people who already have a lot. But that's a wrong perspective. Compounding doesn't depend on large amounts. It requires time. And time is the variable vast majority of people consistently misjudge. Early on, nothing dramatic happens. The numbers change, but not enough to feel significant. It feels slow, almost irrelevant. So people delay. They wait until they have more before starting. But what they're actually doing is giving up the one thing they can never recover later. Time doesn't just add to the outcome. It completely transforms it. A small amount given enough time becomes something substantial. A large amount given no time barely changes. And once you realize that, something else becomes crystal clear. Here's a quick example. If a parent or a grandparent puts in $10,000 into an index fund when a child is born, that kid will have $2 million when they turn 60 just from that one-time contribution and nothing else. The $2 million is a huge sum at any point in time. But $10K is just the difference between buying a $35,000 car and same type of car just off a 3-year lease for $10,000 less. And putting that $10K saved into a brokerage account instead. This is hardly a life-changing shift. It's not much of a deprivation as you still get to enjoy the new to you comfortable transportation. You don't get to opt out of this system. That's the second principle. You can ignore money, you can avoid thinking about it, decide it's not something you want to engage with. But that decision doesn't remove you from the system itself. It just removes your awareness of it. Money will still change hands, it will still grow or shrink. It will still respond to inflation, to opportunity, to neglect. And without attention, it tends to drift in only one direction. Away from you. Which brings up something slightly uncomfortable. Money flows from people who don't pay attention to it towards people who do. Not because one group is smarter than the other, but because attention changes behavior. When you pay attention, you notice patterns. You catch small inefficiencies earlier. You adjust. When you don't, small things compound in the wrong direction. Silently, quietly, gradually, until they're no longer small. So money grows, you can't opt out, and the attention shapes where it flows. That raises a natural question. What is all this for? There's a common answer. Just to have more. To accumulate, to build, to reach a number that feels like enough. But follow that logic all the way through and it leads somewhere very strange. Because if the goal is simply to have money, the most rational strategy would be to never spend it, to protect it, preserve it, and keep it intact. And that doesn't make much sense. Money by itself does nothing for you. Its only purpose is what it allows you to experience. Which leads to a lot more grounded principle. The goal is not to have money. The goal is to use it well. To spend as much as you can over time in ways that genuinely improve your life. Not impulsively, not constantly, but with intention. Unused money is simply stored potential, and potential on its own creates nothing. This is where it gets a lot more nuanced though. Spending well is not the same as spending freely. It's closer to something like judgment or taste. Think of getting dressed. The mechanics are simple, but the outcome depends entirely on how the pieces work together. Two people can spend the same amount and have completely different experiences. One feels comfortable and aligned, the other feels stretched outside of their comfort zone and slightly off. The difference isn't just the act of spending, it's whether the decisions follow certain principles, whether they reflect context, fit, and priorities. And just like with clothing, the gap between doing it well and doing it poorly isn't always visible in the moment. It only shows up over time. In how sustainable your choices feel, in whether your money is supporting your life or quietly undermining it. That's where most people first sense something is off, not dramatically, in small, persistent ways, where effort doesn't translate into stability, where income increases but clarity doesn't. Usually, it traces back to the one thing, a gap between how money works and how it's being used. Once you start seeing money as something that follows principles, another shift happens. You stop thinking of it as a scoreboard. You start seeing it as a constraint. That word tends to carry a negative tone. It sounds like a limitation, restriction, something to work around or avoid. But in practice, constraint is exactly what makes meaningful decisions possible. Without it, nothing has any weight, value, or purpose. Money by its nature forces prioritization. You can have many things. You just can't have all the things at the same time. And that is not a flaw in the system. That is the system. Every dollar has one job. If you save it, you can't spend it. If you spend it here, you can't spend it there. Obvious, maybe, but surprisingly easy to ignore, especially as options expand. Because as income grows or access to credit widens, it starts to feel like the constraint can be loosened. Like maybe you can have everything right now. But this is what actually happens. The trade-offs don't disappear. They just become less visible. When trade-offs turn invisible, decisions become less intentional. You say yes more often, not because any individual choice is unreasonable, but because the accumulation is harder to track. This is the moment where people start feeling stretched without fully understanding why. Each expense makes complete sense alone, but together they form something larger than expected. And that leads directly into the next principle. Money has a built-in time advantage. Time doesn't just influence money, it amplifies it. And people are consistently poor at estimating how much. Because the effects aren't linear, they're exponential. A small decision made once can ripple forward in ways that are difficult to intuit. A modest amount set aside early can grow into something substantial decades later. Not because of constant effort, but because of the duration. Delay the same decision by a few years, and the outcome can drop dramatically. Not slightly, dramatically. Which makes time one of the most valuable and most underused tools in personal finance, but also one of the easiest to waste because it never feels urgent. It never signals its importance clearly in the moment. It silently accumulates consequences. And that applies to spending as much as saving. Because money doesn't only interact with time through growth, it also interacts through experiences. You can use money to change how you spend your time. Sometimes the trade-off makes perfect sense. Spending more to remove friction, create space, focus on what is most important to you now. Other times, it's completely misjudged. You pay a premium for convenience that doesn't meaningfully improve anything, or optimize for speed when time wasn't the real constraint to begin with. So the question isn't just, can I afford this? It should be, what does this do to my time? Does it give something back, or does it simply cost more? Time and money are in constant conversation. The balance between them is rarely static. Now layer on another reality. Money is always in motion even when it looks still. Sitting in a form that doesn't grow, it's slowly losing value. Not in a way you can see day to day, but steadily. Inflation acts like a current. You don't feel it immediately, but over time it moves you. which means even doing nothing is not really neutral. It's a decision, a simple one, but a decision nonetheless. Inactivity feels safe. It feels like preservation. In reality, it's just a form of slow erosion. At the same time, money is moving through your decisions, your habits, your attention or lack thereof it. Which brings me back to a principle that feels almost unfair. Money tends to flow towards attention. If you're not paying attention to it, it will leave you for someone who is. Not all at once, but gradually, through small inefficiencies, missed adjustments, unexamined patterns. It's not dramatic, but it is cumulative, and over time it becomes very difficult to reverse. The opposite is also true. When you pay attention consistently, even in small ways, money behaves differently. It becomes more aligned and less reactive. Attention by itself doesn't guarantee good outcomes, but it dramatically improves the odds. Taken together, these principles paint a picture. Money is constrained, shaped by time, always in motion and responsive to attention. Your financial life isn't just a product of what you earn, it is a reflection of how you engage with these forces. Whether you see them, whether you work with them, or whether you let them run without you. There's an assumption that sits quietly underneath a lot of financial decisions. You don't often hear it stated, but it shows up in behavior. It goes something like this. I need more money before I can live the life I want. It sounds practical, even responsible, but it's usually less true than it appears. Look around honestly, without filtering for status or comparison, and you'll find people living deeply fulfilling lives across a wide range of incomes. Not in theory, not in curated stories you read in a magazine, but in ordinary places not far from where you are. People who've structured their lives in a way that works, who know what matters to them, who aren't waiting for some future number before they begin. In many cases, they're not just getting by, they're genuinely content, sometimes more so than people with significantly more. Which suggests something important. Fulfillment isn't a direct function of income. It's a function of alignment between what you value and how you use what you have. That alignment doesn't come from earning more alone. It comes from understanding trade-offs, from making decisions that reflect your priorities rather than someone else's. And this is where another subtle principle comes into play. Ands are expensive. A large house in the country might be affordable. Living close to a major city might be affordable. Access to excellent schools might be manageable. A mild climate might be within reach. But start combining them, a large house and a prime location and top-tier schools and ideal weather, and you're no longer dealing with a simple upgrade. You're in a different category of cost entirely. This is where many financial plans quietly unravel. Not because of one bad decision, but because of stacking reasonable desires into something that requires far more than expected. Each addition feels small, it's just one more improvement, just one more thing. But the combined effect is multiplicative, and unless you're watching for it, it creates pressure. Pressure to earn more, pressure to stretch, pressure to maintain a lifestyle that's less flexible than it first appeared. Which brings me to something that doesn't get talked about enough. Living well with money isn't a tactical decision. It's not something you solve once, implement, and move on from. It's ongoing, evolving, no clear finish line. Because your circumstances change, your priorities shift, your definition of enough evolves. And with that comes another reality, diminishing returns. At a certain point, more money stops meaningfully changing your day-to-day experience. It may expand comfort, maybe widen your options a bit, but it doesn't necessarily deepen fulfillment. Past that point, the relationship can even invert. More resources can introduce more complexity, more decisions, more subtle forms of stress. So the goal isn't simply to maximize, it is to calibrate. To find your baseline, the point where needs are met and values are expressed and life feels coherent. And then to operate from there with intention. Not to stop growing, but to grow in ways that still remain aligned. Because without that calibration, it's easy to keep pushing for more without ever defining what more is actually for. And that drift can go on for a very long time before it's noticed. Which leads me to the final principle. There is no shortcut to understanding money. No single insight that resolves everything. No tactic that permanently fixes the system. But there is a progress, and progress accumulates and compounds. As your situation changes, you learn, you refine your understanding. You clarify what matters to you, sometimes through success, but often through mistakes. And over time, something begins to happen. Your decisions become less reactive, less driven by urgency or comparison, more grounded and more deliberate. You start to see patterns earlier. You recognize trade-offs more clearly. You avoid decisions that would have felt invisible before. Gradually, your relationship with money itself shifts. From something that feels external, something happening to you, to something you actively participate in. Not perfectly, not without friction or mistakes, but with awareness. And that awareness changes everything, because once you understand the principles, once you see how money actually behaves, you're no longer guessing. You're working within a system that, while isn't different, is not unpredictable. Money doesn't care about you, but it does follow rules. It grows when given more time. It responds to attention. It forces trade-offs, and it amplifies your decisions. And ultimately, it reflects your values. Not what you say they are, but how you actually allocate your resources. When you align those choices consistently over time, you don't just improve your finances. You create something a lot more stable, more intentional, and more your own. Not by chasing more, but by understanding what you already have and using it well. Thank you.